You're going to be their husband. Apache Chief left 3 tall sisters in the rancher's barn. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In the vast open plains of the American West, where the wind carried the scent of dry grass and the sky stretched endlessly above, there lived a rancher named Jack. Jack was a quiet man, preferring the solitude of his land and the company of his cattle. His small ranch sat on the edge of a remote valley, far from any neighboring settlements. His days were spent tending to his livestock and fixing fences, the monotony of which he found comforting after the loss of his wife many years ago. Jack had long since given up on love and relationships. His heart was a fortress, built high and strong, protecting him from the loneliness that often crept into his soul. But that was all about to change. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, a figure appeared on the horizon. At first, Jack thought it was just a mirage, but as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a woman. Not just any woman, but 3 tall, imposing figures, their silhouettes framed by the fading light. They were the daughters of an Apache chief, their strong presence radiating an aura of power and mystery. As they approached Jack's barn, the tallest one, a woman named Ahuli, spoke first. "You will marry us," she said, her voice deep and commanding. Jack stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. The 3 sisters, each more formidable than the next, stood before him like a force of nature. Jack had heard of the Apache tribe, of their customs and fierce warriors, but he never imagined he would be caught in their world. The middle sister, named Tala, was the second tallest, her posture as proud and unyielding as the mountain ranges that surrounded them. The youngest, Kiwa, had a wildness in her eyes, like a storm waiting to break free. They were unlike any women Jack had ever encountered. Their beauty was undeniable, but it was their strength, their confidence, that captivated him the most. Despite his initial shock, Jack couldn't help but feel drawn to them. There was something in their eyes, a challenge, a demand that he could not ignore. "Why?" Jack managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Ahuli's gaze softened, and she stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "Our father has given us to you," she explained. "We are to protect this land, and in return, you will marry us." Jack was still reeling from the absurdity of it all, but the sincerity in her words left him with no choice but to listen. He had no idea what fate had in store for him, but he knew one thing. His life would never be the same again. The 3 sisters weren't just warriors. They were a part of something much larger, something Jack had no understanding of yet. But as the evening air grew colder and the first stars began to twinkle above, Jack realized that the storm he had been avoiding for so long had finally found him. I can see Jack standing there, still trying to process the reality of the 3 Apache sisters standing before him. His heart raced, a storm of emotions flooding his chest, but his mind remained clouded. He had never imagined such an encounter in his quiet, solitary life. The silence between them stretched on, broken only by the soft rustling of the wind through the tall grass. Ahuli, the tallest and the leader of the 3, continued to fix Jack with a steady gaze, her eyes filled with purpose and authority. Tala, the middle sister, stood slightly apart from the others, her arms crossed over her broad chest, a faint smile playing at her lips as if she was amused by Jack's confusion. Kiwa, the youngest, looked at him with an intensity that made Jack uneasy, her dark eyes filled with both curiosity and a fire he could not understand. "We are here for you," Ahuli said, her voice calm but firm. "Our father has commanded it." Jack felt a strange tension rise in his chest, a mix of disbelief and intrigue. He had heard rumors of the Apache people, of their customs, their strength, and their warriors, but he had never expected to be caught in such a situation. "But why me?" Jack asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, still struggling to comprehend the enormity of the moment. "You are the one chosen," Ahuli replied, her tone unyielding. "Our father saw something in you. Something you may not yet understand, but you will. You will marry us and protect this land with us. Jack shook his head slightly, unsure whether to laugh or run. It all seemed so surreal. The idea of marrying 3 women, especially such strong, commanding women, was beyond anything he had ever considered. But the more he looked at them, the more he realized that this was no ordinary encounter. These women were different, and they were determined. I don't know what to say, Jack admitted, his mind racing. You don't have to say anything. Tala spoke up, her voice soft but insistent. We are not asking for your permission. This is our fate, and you are part of it. Kiwa stepped forward, her movements quick and precise, like a hawk preparing to strike. We have been chosen to join with you, to stand with you, she said, her voice carrying a sense of urgency. Jack could feel the weight of her words, like they carried the force of a promise or a prophecy. This was not a mere request. It was something much deeper, something that bound them all together. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, and for the first time, Jack understood the gravity of the situation. These women were not just seeking to fulfill a cultural ritual. They were offering him a chance at something greater, something he could not yet comprehend. For a moment, the only sound was the wind and the distant call of a hawk, soaring high above the plains. Jack finally spoke, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. All right, he said, his gaze shifting from Ahuli to Tala and then to Kiwa. I'll marry you. But I need to understand more. What does it all mean? What am I really agreeing to? Ahuli nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. You are agreeing to become a part of our tribe, to join us in protecting this land and our people. This is not just a marriage. This is a bond, a covenant between us, and it will shape the future of this land. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, and for the first time, he realized that his life, his quiet existence, was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, Jack woke up to the sound of the wind rustling through the tall grass surrounding his ranch. He had spent the night thinking about everything Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa had told him. His mind was still racing, the weight of the decision pressing on him like the heat of the midday sun. He had agreed to marry them, but what did that really mean? What would his life be like now? As he stepped out of the barn and into the light of the early morning, he saw them again. The 3 Apache sisters were already waiting for him, standing like statues by the edge of the land. They were tall, their figures almost commanding, with their dark eyes fixed on him. There was no going back now. Jack felt a strange sense of inevitability wash over him. Ahuli was the first to speak, her voice as steady as the mountains that loomed in the distance. We are glad you understand the responsibility you are taking on, she said, her gaze unwavering. This is more than just a marriage. This is a pact, a promise to protect the land, to stand together as one. Jack nodded slowly, the enormity of the situation still sinking in. He had spent so many years alone, unwilling to trust anyone, and now, here he was, about to become part of something far bigger than himself. Tala, the middle sister, stepped forward next. Her smile was faint, but there was something in her eyes that made Jack uneasy. She was the most reserved of the 3, and her presence was like the calm before a storm. Do not worry, she said, her voice softer than Ahuli's, but no less powerful. We will teach you what you need to know. Together, we will make this land thrive. It is not just about survival. It is about respect and honor. Jack swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. He had never thought much about honor, not in the way they seemed to. It had always been about work, about getting by. But now, as he looked at these women, he realized that their world was about more than just hard work. It was about a deeper connection to the land and to each other. Kiwa, the youngest, was the last to speak. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a mix of excitement and determination. You are not just marrying us, she said, her voice sharp like the crack of a whip. You are joining our people. You will fight with us, protect with us, and live by our code. It will not be easy, but it will be worth it. Her words struck Jack like a thunderclap. He had always known that life was tough, but he had never considered what it meant to truly fight for something greater than himself. These women, these sisters, were not just warriors. They were leaders, and they had chosen him to stand by their side. As the day went on, Jack found himself learning more than he ever expected. Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa taught him the ways of the Apache people, their traditions, and their fierce loyalty to the land. They showed him how to track animals, how to move silently through the wilderness, and how to fight when the time came. He learned to respect the earth in a way he had never imagined. But there was still so much Jack didn't understand. As the sun set on his second day with them, he found himself standing alone, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched before him. He had agreed to join them, but was he truly ready for what that would mean? What would his life be like when the peace he had known for so long was shattered? He could hear the sound of hooves approaching, and he knew they were coming. The sisters were not just warriors. They were part of a tribe, and that tribe was about to be drawn into something much bigger. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized that this was just the beginning. The world he had known was slipping away, and in its place, a new world was taking shape. One that was far more dangerous, but also more powerful than anything he had ever known. As the days passed, Jack began to adapt to the new reality that had come crashing into his life. The Apache sisters, Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa, were relentless in their teachings, and Jack found himself learning faster than he ever thought possible. He had never imagined that his life would come to this. The life of a warrior, of someone bound to a cause much greater than himself. The sun rose higher each day, casting long shadows over the land, and Jack's understanding of this world grew deeper. But there was a tension in the air. It was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Jack knew something was coming, something that would change everything. On the fourth day, as Jack sat near the campfire, cleaning his rifle, Kiwa approached him, her expression serious. "Get ready," she said, her voice low. "The time has come." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The urgency in her tone was unmistakable. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing anxiety in his chest. Kiwa did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned toward the horizon, where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red. The sky looked like it was on fire, and the air smelled of dust and earth. "Our people are in danger," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The settlers have begun moving into the valley. They think they can take this land from us. They don't know what they're dealing with." Jack stood up, his rifle in hand, and looked at the sisters. They were all standing together now, a united front, their eyes burning with the same intensity. Ahuli, the eldest and the leader, spoke next. "We must protect this land," she said, her voice commanding. "This is our home, and we will not let anyone take it from us. We fight for what is ours." Jack felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about his decision to join them. It was about something much bigger. It was about honor, duty, and survival. Tala, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her face hard and determined. "You have a choice, Jack," she said. "You can stay here and protect this land with us, or you can leave. But know this, if you leave, you will be running from something you cannot escape. This fight is coming, and it's going to change everything." Jack looked at each of the sisters, their faces fierce, their eyes unwavering. He had spent so many years hiding from the world, from pain, from loss. But now, as he stood before them, he realized he couldn't run anymore. He couldn't go back to the quiet life he had known. This was his fight now. "I'm with you," he said, his voice resolute. The sisters nodded, and without another word, they began preparing for the coming battle. They worked swiftly, gathering their weapons, checking the horses, and making sure they were ready. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the land bathed in the eerie light of twilight. Jack felt the weight of the moment. This was real now. The valley was about to see what the Apache people were capable of. As the last of the light faded, they mounted their horses and rode out, heading toward the valley where the settlers had begun to make their move. Jack rode alongside them, his heart pounding in his chest. He was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something much larger, something that would define the rest of his life. They rode in silence, the sound of hooves echoing in the stillness of the night. Jack could feel the tension rising, the anticipation of what was to come. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. The fight was coming, and he would be ready. The air was thick with tension as Jack and the Apache sisters rode towards the valley. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, and the wind carried the scent of dry earth and anticipation. Jack's heart beat faster with each passing moment, his mind racing with what lay ahead. He had never been in a battle like this before. His life had always been about tending cattle and keeping to himself. But now, as the sisters rode beside him, he felt a sense of purpose rising within him. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a part of something much bigger, something he couldn't turn away from. The sound of hooves echoed through the valley as they approached the settlement where the settlers had begun to stake their claim. Jack could see the smoke rising from the chimneys, hear the chatter of people preparing for a life in the wilderness. He felt a pang of resentment towards them, the intruders who dared to take the land that had been the Apache people's for generations. He didn't know if he was ready to kill, but he knew this was the moment he had chosen. This was the price of joining the sisters, of standing with them as they fought for their land. As they approached the settlement, Ahuli turned to him, her eyes cold and focused. "Stay close," she commanded. "Follow our lead, and don't hesitate." Jack nodded, tightening his grip on his rifle. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. They arrived at the outskirts of the settlement just as the last light of day disappeared behind the hills. The settlers had not yet noticed them, and the silence of the night was broken only by the sound of the wind and the occasional rustling of leaves. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the sisters move like shadows through the trees. They were silent, swift, and deadly. Ahuli led the way, her posture straight and commanding, while Tala followed closely behind, her sharp eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Kiwa was the last to move, her eyes narrowed in determination. Jack stayed close behind them, his movements awkward but growing more confident with each step. The tension was palpable as they approached the first of the settlers' homes. Jack could see the faint glow of a lantern through the window, and he could hear voices from inside. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he wondered if he had made the right decision. But then he saw the look in the sisters' eyes. This was the way it had to be. They were fighting for their land, for their people, and for their future. Jack had become a part of that fight. Ahuli gave a small signal, and the sisters moved into action. The settlers had no chance to react. Within moments, the small home was surrounded. Jack's heart raced, and he could feel his body tensing in preparation. He had never killed before, but the stories the sisters had told him about defending their people, about the weight of responsibility, they all flooded his mind now. Ahuli was the first to step forward, her voice low but firm. "This land belongs to the Apache," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "Leave now, or face the consequences." The settlers inside froze, their fear palpable. Jack could see the confusion in their eyes, and for a split second, he felt a pang of sympathy. But it quickly faded. They were the invaders, and they had come here with their own intentions. The sisters were simply doing what needed to be done. Tala stepped forward, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice cold as ice. The settlers hesitated, looking to each other for guidance. Jack could see that they were frightened, but they were also stubborn. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In an instant, the tension snapped. One of the settlers, a young man with a rugged face, lunged toward his rifle. Without hesitation, Ahuli raised her bow, releasing the arrow with deadly accuracy. It hit the young man in the chest, and he fell to the ground, his blood staining the dirt. The sound of the arrow's impact echoed in Jack's ears, and he froze, his heart pounding in his chest. This was real. The fight had begun. Kiwa moved swiftly, her movements like a shadow as she disarmed another settler who had tried to reach for a weapon. The sisters were in control. Jack stood still, unsure of what to do next. His mind was racing, but his body remained frozen in place. This was not the life he had imagined, but it was the life he had chosen. As the battle unfolded around him, Jack's hesitation began to fade. He had come this far, and he couldn't back out now. The settlers were fighting back, but they were no match for the Apache warriors. Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, taking down their enemies one by one. Jack watched in awe as the sisters fought with such grace and power. The land they had sworn to protect was in danger, and they would stop at nothing to defend it. The battle raged on under the harsh moonlight, the air thick with the scent of dust and the heavy sound of footsteps and cries echoing through the valley. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his rifle at his side, his body still adjusting to the chaos unfolding around him. The settlers, now fully aware of the stakes, had started to regroup, trying to mount a defense against the Apache warriors who had descended upon them like a storm. He could hear the shouts of the Apache sisters as they fought, their voices sharp and commanding. Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa moved with deadly precision, cutting through the opposition with a grace and ferocity Jack had never seen before. Jack's mind raced. He had never been a fighter. His life had been about working the land, about building something steady and enduring. But this wasn't about that anymore. This was about survival. This was about standing by the people who had chosen him, who had given him a purpose. He had made a decision when he joined them. He couldn't back out now. With a deep breath, Jack steadied his rifle and joined the fray. He moved toward the nearest settler, a burly man with a dirty face, trying to find his bearings amid the madness. Jack raised his rifle, aiming at the man who was about to fire at one of the Apache warriors. The shot rang out, and the settler collapsed to the ground, his weapon falling from his hands. The moment of victory was fleeting, but it gave Jack the confidence he needed. He wasn't as skilled as the Apache sisters, but he could still fight. He could still protect. As the fight continued, Jack felt the rush of adrenaline in his veins. The night had become a blur of violence and fear, each moment more intense than the last. But even amidst the chaos, he could see the Apache warriors working in unison, their movements fluid, their strategy precise. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their home, for their people, for everything that had been taken from them. The settlers, though desperate, were no match for the Apache warriors' strength and skill. As Jack watched the sisters move through the battlefield, he saw how they commanded respect, how they led by example. Ahuli was everywhere, her bow drawn, releasing arrows with pinpoint accuracy. Tala was equally deadly, her blade cutting through the air as she swiftly moved from one settler to the next. Kiwa, though younger, fought with a raw intensity that was almost frightening. Jack had never seen anything like it. In the heat of the battle, Jack found himself face to face with another settler, a man much younger than the others, his hands shaking as he tried to lift a rifle. Jack hesitated for a moment, his rifle raised, his finger hovering over the trigger. He saw the fear in the man's eyes, the desperation, and for a brief second, he wondered if this was what it had all come to, if this was what he had signed up for. But before he could think any longer, the man's rifle discharged, and Jack fired back, the shot echoing across the valley. The settler fell to the ground with a thud, and Jack felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He wasn't sure if he had made the right choice, but in that moment, there was no time for doubt. The fight was still on. The Apache warriors were pushing forward, forcing the settlers back, inch by inch. Jack saw Ahuli signal for the final push. "We end this now," she commanded. With that, the Apache warriors surged forward, their movements synchronized, their resolve unshakable. The settlers, now outnumbered and outmatched, began to retreat, their fight lost. Jack watched as the last of them fled into the darkness, leaving behind their homes and their land. The battlefield fell silent, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees and the distant calls of the night. Jack lowered his rifle, his body shaking from the intensity of the battle. He had fought alongside the Apache sisters, and in doing so, he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He had stepped into a new world, one where survival and loyalty were the only things that mattered. As the dust settled, Jack found himself standing next to Ahuli. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. But in her eyes, Jack saw a flicker of respect. "You did well," she said finally, her voice steady. Jack nodded, but he didn't feel like he had done enough. He had fought, yes, but the cost of that fight was something he couldn't yet grasp. As the sisters began to move toward the settlers' abandoned homes to secure the area, Jack stayed behind, his mind racing with the implications of everything that had just happened. He had become a part of something much larger than himself, and the weight of it pressed down on him like the weight of the land itself. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a part of the Apache people now, and whatever came next, he would face it with them. The aftermath of the battle left the air thick with smoke and dust, the ground marked by the remnants of a fight that had claimed more than a few lives. The settlers had fled into the night, leaving behind their homes, their belongings, and the land they had tried to claim. Jack stood quietly among the ruins of the settlement, his eyes scanning the wreckage. His heart was still racing from the violence, but now there was only silence. The Apache sisters were already at work, moving swiftly to secure the area. Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa had proven themselves in ways that Jack could never have anticipated, their skill in battle unmatched. And yet, as the sun began to rise, Jack found himself questioning what it all meant. The battle had been won, but the cost weighed heavily on his mind. He was no longer just a rancher, no longer just a man who worked the land and lived alone. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the sisters moved through the settlement, gathering what was left, Ahuli approached Jack. Her face was stoic, as always, but Jack could see the hint of something in her eyes, something that suggested she understood what he was feeling. "You did well," she said, her voice steady. "But this is just the beginning." Jack looked at her, trying to grasp the full weight of her words. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low. Ahuli gestured toward the horizon, where the sun was rising, casting a golden light over the valley. "Now we rebuild. We protect what is ours. And we prepare for what comes next." Jack nodded slowly, the realization settling in that this was not just about fighting. It was about survival. It was about protecting something greater than himself. The fight for the land was far from over. As the day wore on, Jack spent more time with the sisters, learning their ways, understanding their culture, and the deep connection they had to the land. He had always thought of himself as a solitary man, but now he saw the strength that came from community, from standing together for a common cause. The Apache way was not just about fighting. It was about loyalty, honor, and respect for the land. Jack felt his resolve strengthen with each passing hour. He was no longer the man who had simply worked the land. He was a part of something much greater now. He had joined the Apache people, and with that came a responsibility he couldn't ignore. That night, as the campfire crackled and the stars filled the sky, the sisters gathered around. They were quieter now, their faces more reflective as they sat together. Jack joined them, his mind still racing with everything that had happened. "You've seen what we're capable of," Tala said, her voice soft but firm. "But this isn't just about fighting. It's about protecting our way of life." Kiwa nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with a determination that mirrored her words. "We protect each other. We protect this land. And we will do whatever it takes to make sure no one takes it from us." Jack understood then. This was their home, their heritage, and they would fight for it until the very end. But there was more to it than that. It wasn't just about survival. It was about honor, about standing together as a family, as a people. Jack had never fully understood that before. He had always been alone, isolated from the world. But now he was a part of something bigger, something that gave him strength and purpose. The fire flickered between them, casting long shadows on their faces as they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Jack's gaze shifted from one sister to the next. They had accepted him, had trusted him, and now he was bound to them in a way that went beyond blood. They had chosen him, and he had chosen them. The responsibility was his, and he would carry it. The days ahead would be filled with challenges. The settlers would not give up easily, and the Apache would face many more battles before this was over. But Jack knew now that he wasn't alone. He had the sisters by his side, and together they would fight for their land, for their people, and for everything they held dear. As the days went on, Jack felt the weight of his decision grow heavier. The Apache sisters had given him more than just the responsibility of protecting their land. They had given him a new life. A life of purpose, a life that he had never expected. He was no longer just the solitary rancher working the land. He was now a part of something much greater, something far more important than anything he had known before. But with that came the constant reminder of the battle ahead. The settlers had not been fully defeated. They had been forced to retreat, but Jack knew they would return. And when they did, the Apache would be ready. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, Ahuli called Jack to join her by the fire. The evening air was cooler now, a stark contrast to the heat of the day. The fire crackled as the sisters sat around it, their faces illuminated by the warm glow. Jack joined them, sitting beside Ahuli, who was sharpening her blade. "You've proven yourself, Jack," she said, her voice steady but filled with an intensity that made Jack listen carefully. "But this fight is far from over. The settlers will come back, and when they do, we need to be ready." Jack nodded, his hands resting on his knees as he watched the flames dance. I know they'll be back, he said, his voice low. But how do we stop them? How do we keep them from taking everything we've fought for? Ahuli looked at him, her gaze piercing. We fight back. We don't give them an inch. We protect our land, our people, and our way of life. Her words rang with conviction, and Jack felt the fire of determination grow inside him. He had seen the strength of the Apache warriors, the way they fought for what was theirs. He had felt their loyalty, their commitment to one another, and to the land they called home. It wasn't just about survival. It was about honor, about standing firm in the face of adversity, and about protecting everything they held dear. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The Apache sisters led Jack through rigorous training, teaching him the ways of their people. He learned how to track, how to move silently through the wilderness, and how to fight with purpose. They taught him how to think strategically, to read the land, and to understand the rhythms of the world around him. Jack's body grew stronger, his movements more fluid. But more importantly, his mind began to shift. He was no longer the man who had avoided conflict. He was now a part of a people who fought not just for their survival, but for their very existence. They weren't just defending their homes. They were defending their identity, their culture, and their future. One afternoon, as they were finishing their training, Tala approached Jack. She was holding a bow in her hands, her face serious. You've come a long way, Jack, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. But there's something you need to understand. Jack turned to her, curious. What is it? He asked. Tala's eyes met his, and for the first time, Jack saw a glimpse of something softer, something more personal. This fight, she said, her voice low, isn't just about fighting the settlers. It's about fighting for who we are. It's about our people, our families, and our future. If we lose this battle, we lose everything. And we don't just lose the land. We lose our way of life. We lose our culture. We lose each other. Jack felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He had known the stakes, but hearing Tala say it so plainly made it feel even more real. The Apache people were not just defending land. They were defending their identity, their heritage. He had been a part of that now. His life was intertwined with theirs, and he knew that whatever happened next, he would stand by them. As the days turned into weeks, the tension continued to build. The settlers, though silent, were never far from Jack's mind. He knew they were planning something. The question was when they would strike. Jack and the sisters had fortified their camp, setting traps, reinforcing their defenses, and preparing for whatever might come next. They knew it wasn't a matter of if, but when. And when the time came, they would be ready. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jack stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the land. The wind had shifted, and there was a strange calm in the air. He could feel it, the same tension he had felt before the battle with the settlers. Something was coming. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had a purpose, and he had the strength of the Apache people by his side. The fight was far from over, but Jack was ready. He had made his choice, and he would stand with them, no matter what the future held. The night before the final confrontation, the air was heavy with anticipation. Jack stood outside the camp, looking out over the land. It had been a long journey to this point, one that had changed him in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this valley months ago. He had been a quiet rancher, lost in the simplicity of his life, avoiding the larger conflicts that surrounded him. But now, he was a warrior, a part of something much bigger than himself. The Apache sisters had not just trained him in the ways of survival and combat. They had shown him the deeper meaning of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. Jack had become part of their tribe, not just in name, but in heart. As the moon rose high in the sky, the valley grew still. Jack could hear the distant sounds of the wind rustling through the trees and the faint calls of coyotes in the distance. It was a peaceful night, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. The settlers were coming, and they were coming with everything they had. The Apache had already won many battles, but this would be their most important. It would determine the future of their people, and Jack knew that the outcome of this battle would change everything. As he walked back toward the campfire, Ahuli and Tala were already waiting for him. They sat by the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. Kiwa stood slightly apart, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the darkness as if she could sense the danger that was drawing closer. Are you ready? Ahuli asked, her voice low but steady. Jack nodded, his heart racing. "I'm ready," he said, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. He had never faced an enemy like this before. The settlers were not just fighting for land. They were fighting for their way of life. They would not go down easily. But Jack had learned from the best. The Apache warriors had shown him the value of patience, of knowing when to fight and when to wait. This was not a battle of brute strength. It was a battle of strategy, of endurance, and of heart. "Tomorrow we will fight," Tala said, her voice calm and firm. "But we fight not just for our land. We fight for our people, for our future. We fight for everything that has been taken from us. And we fight together." Jack felt a surge of determination. He was not just fighting for the Apache people. He was fighting for something deeper, for the honor of the land, for the respect of his new family, and for the future of everything they held dear. As the night wore on, the campfire crackled and popped, and Jack found himself lost in thought. The battle was coming, and there was no turning back. But he wasn't afraid. He had been given a purpose, a reason to fight, and he would stand by the sisters, no matter what. The first light of dawn broke across the horizon, casting long shadows over the valley. The battle was upon them. Jack stood beside Ahuli, Tala, and Kiwa, their faces set in expressions of determination. They were ready. The time had come. The settlers were approaching, their movements slow and deliberate. Jack could see them in the distance, a line of men and women walking steadily toward the Apache camp. The tension in the air was thick, and Jack could feel his pulse quicken. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. As the settlers drew closer, Ahuli gave the signal, and the Apache warriors moved into position. Jack followed the sisters, his rifle ready, his breath steady. They had prepared for this. They had trained for this. And now, they would fight. The first shots rang out, the crack of gunfire breaking the stillness of the morning. The settlers returned fire, but the Apache warriors were fast, moving with the precision of a well-trained unit. Jack moved with them, his body reacting instinctively as he followed the lead of the sisters. He wasn't just part of the fight. He was part of the strategy. The battle raged on, each side gaining and losing ground in the blink of an eye. Jack fought alongside the sisters, his rifle aimed and steady as he fired at the settlers who dared to cross their line. It was chaotic, but in the midst of it, Jack felt a strange sense of calm. He had become part of this. He had chosen this life, and now, he would live it too. The fullest. Hours passed, and the battle began to shift in the Apache's favor. The settlers were outnumbered, and their resistance weakened. Jack could see the exhaustion on their faces, the fear in their eyes. They had underestimated the Apache people, and they had underestimated Jack. As the dust settled and the cries of the fallen faded, the Apache stood victorious. The settlers had been pushed back, their forces scattered, their morale broken. Jack stood among the warriors, his heart pounding with the rush of victory. But there was no time to celebrate. The fight had been won, but the war was not over. The land was theirs, but so much more was at stake. Jack knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a new life, one that he would face with the Apache by his side. As the sisters gathered around him, Jack felt a deep sense of pride. They had fought together, and together, they had won. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Jack had found his place. And he would fight for it, every step of the way.